What does courage mean, when the enemy outnumbers you 1,000 to 1, and the Emperor's light feels so very far away? The question lingered in the ash-thick air like the faint echo of a dying prayer. Brother Sergeant Acastus stood upon the ruins of what was once a city, now a graveyard of iron and bone. The sky above was the color of old blood, churned with smoke and the green glow of distant orc fires. Every gust of wind carried the stench of oil, decay, and charred flesh, the perfume of a world devoured by war. He had fought on 100 worlds, witnessed horrors that would have driven mortal men mad, but this silence, this waiting, it was worse than all of them. The vox crackled uselessly in his ear, a faint hiss of static where once there were voices. His brothers, 9 of them, had stood with him when they made planet fall. Now there were 3. Perhaps 2, if Brother Pyrrhus's wounds had festered as badly as they looked. The others lay buried beneath the mud and corpses at their feet. The Emperor's angels reduced to meat and metal fragments. Acastus had stopped counting bodies hours ago. Numbers meant nothing here. Only survival, and even that was slipping away. The world they had come to defend had no name worth remembering anymore. It was an imperial outpost, a mining colony on the edge of the Segmentum Obscurus, where humanity had once clawed minerals from the earth for ships they would never see. The orcs came from the void like a disease. At first, raiding parties, crude, loud, confident. Then, waves of them, until the skies themselves trembled with their madness. The Imperial Guard had fought bravely. The planetary defense forces had burned. And when there was nothing left, the Adeptus Astartes came to do what mortals could not, to die slowly, gloriously, and without surrender. Acastus looked out over the shattered battlements, his helmet removed, his scarred face illuminated by the red glow of a dying sun. His armor, once a proud shade of cobalt and gold, was now caked with soot, oil, and blood, some his own, most not. His breath steamed in the cold air as he whispered the catechism of readiness: steel endures. Faith burns. Duty never falters. The words were empty now, worn smooth by repetition, but still he said them. To stop speaking them would be to admit the truth that the Emperor was not listening. He could feel it. The world was holding its breath. Even the carrion birds were silent. The orcs would come soon. They always came in the same way: laughter first, then thunder, then fire. The green tide would sweep through the valley below and climb the walls like ants over a corpse. There was no strategy, no subtlety, no mercy. Just noise, fury, and numbers beyond comprehension. Brother Corvin's voice broke the silence, a rasp through his helmet grill. They'll hit us before dawn. His tone was not fear, just fact. Acastus nodded slowly. Then we hold until dawn. Corvin's chuckle was dry, humorless. And if no dawn comes, then we hold anyway. That was all there was to say. In the brief lull before the storm, Acastus allowed his mind to drift backward to the ship that brought them here, the Vigilant Oath. He remembered the hum of the engines, the chanting of the chaplain, the certainty of purpose that came with the Emperor's blessing. Back then, war had seemed clean, righteous, a holy duty wrapped in fire. But down here, amid the dirt and blood, it was something else entirely. Holy words didn't stop orc axes. Faith didn't refill bolter magazines. He had seen Brother Etrius die 3 days ago, torn in half by a greenskin brute twice his height. Etrius hadn't screamed. He had simply kept firing as his torso fell away. Even now, Acastus could hear the echo of his battle cry, swallowed by the orc laughter. There was no nobility in it. Just inevitability. The vox sputtered again, a broken signal, perhaps from the last bastion of human resistance deeper inland. A voice flickered through static, repeating the same word: hold, hold, until it faded entirely. It could have been an order, a plea, or a ghost. It didn't matter. The Emperor demanded endurance, and so they endured. Acastus looked down at his bolter, its once sacred inscriptions now chipped and blackened. Every weapon was a relic, every bullet a prayer. He checked the magazine. 30 rounds. That was all. 30 more chances to make the greenskins bleed before they reached him. He thumbed the purity seal on the side of his armor and whispered a silent vow. For each breath I take, one of them dies. The first tremor came minutes later, faint, almost gentle. Then another, stronger. The earth itself began to quiver beneath his boots. In the distance, a low roar rose, building into something monstrous. It was not just noise. It was hunger. The Waaagh was coming. Acastus slid his helmet back on, sealing himself once more inside the cold sanctuary of ceramite and faith. The auto senses flickered to life, scanning the horizon, amplifying the sound. His heart beat in rhythm with the approaching thunder. He whispered through the vox, "Brothers, stand ready." Corvin's voice came back, steady but grim. "For the Emperor." "For the Emperor," Acastus echoed. The wind shifted. The sky turned the color of rot. And from the depths of the valley came a sound that could only be described as the laughter of hell itself. The waiting was over. Have you ever wondered what it truly feels like when a god of war realizes he's not invincible? When the myth of the Emperor's Chosen meets the raw, savage truth of the universe that even the strongest can bleed, and even angels can fall? Stay with me till the end, because what happens next will change how you see the Space Marines forever. The storm began not with lightning, but with laughter, crude, guttural, endless. Orcish laughter rolled through the valley like thunder, echoing off the shattered ruins and hollowing out the air itself. Then came the drums, massive and primal, beating in sync with the pounding of thousands of feet. The sound hit like a physical force. The ground trembled, dust rising in choking clouds as the green tide came into view. From his position among the broken fortifications, Brother Sergeant Acastus saw the horizon come alive, a writhing sea of green muscle and metal. Orcs of every size and shape, clad in scrap armor and madness, screamed war cries that rattled the air. Crude banners waved high, splattered with blood and oil, their glyphs painted in mockery of imperial heraldry. They were not soldiers, they were chaos given flesh, a storm of teeth and rage. Acastus steadied his bolter. The targeting reticule in his visor flashed red, painting hundreds of enemies at once and then overwhelmed, blinking white from the sheer mass of movement. It didn't matter. He aimed by instinct now. He waited until he could smell them, the stink of fungus, sweat, and oil, before he spoke, a whisper more to himself than anyone else. "Let them come." The first round screamed from his bolter, the recoil slamming into his arm as mass reactive shells detonated inside orcish skulls. The sound was deafening, but it wasn't enough. For every one that fell, 10 more surged forward. Corvin joined in beside him, his heavy bolter roaring with vengeance. Together they carved a storm of fire across the field, a brief, shining defiance against the inevitable. The orcs hit the wall like a living avalanche. The ground shook beneath their charge, and in seconds, the Space Marines were swallowed by green flesh and metal. Chainswords roared, axes screamed, blood sprayed in fountains. Acastus moved like a machine, a perfect blend of rage and precision, each motion honed by centuries of war. He crushed skulls, split armor, and tore limbs with the fury of a god who had forgotten mercy. But even gods tire when drowning in monsters. An orc knob, massive and scarred, swung a hammer the size of a human body. Acastus ducked under the blow and drove his power sword upward, splitting the creature from gut to throat. The orc's laugh choked into a wet gurgle before it collapsed, twitching. He didn't stop to look. There was no time. Another came. Then another. The battlefield became a blur of green and red, pain and steel. Over the vox, Corvin's voice burst through static. "Brother Sergeant." "The line's breaking." "Hold." Acastus roared back. His voice was a command and a prayer in one. "Hold the Emperor's line." But even as he spoke, he saw the left flank collapsing under the weight of the horde. Orcs poured through like a flood, dragging wounded Marines down beneath their boots. The screams over the Vox were short, brutal, and final. Acastus turned, firing into the breach until his bolter clicked empty. He drew his combat knife, its edge serrated with ritual inscriptions, and threw himself into the melee. He was surrounded now, green bodies pressing in from all sides, their stench suffocating. Every breath burned in his chest. His armor was dented, scorched, bleeding fluids. His strength was waning, but his fury only grew. What happens when even the unbreakable begins to break? When the symbols of divine power, the angels of humanity, are reduced to blood, fear, and bone beneath the weight of an endless horde. This is where glory dies, and only survival remains. The dawn came slowly, weak and crimson, filtered through smoke and ash. It illuminated nothing but ruin. The walls that once stood proud were now little more than shattered rockcrete, buried beneath the corpses of orcs and men alike. The air was thick with the buzzing of flies and the crackle of distant fire. The battlefield no longer belonged to either side. It was a graveyard. Brother Sergeant Acastus stood in the center of it all, his armor pitted and cracked, his once proud insignia burned away. The green tide had receded, not defeated, merely pausing to feast and gather strength. Around him, only two of his brothers still lived. Pyrrhus lay half buried in rubble, his chest plate torn open, his breath a ragged wheeze. The other, Brother Murin, knelt beside a broken turret, murmuring battle prayers through bloodied lips, his chainsword resting limply at his side. The silence was unbearable. It wasn't peace, it was the weight of something waiting. Acastus reached for his Vox link, adjusting the frequency. Static. Always static. No command, no reinforcements, no word from orbit. The Imperial fleet was gone, or dead, or worse, indifferent. They were alone now. Alone on a dying world, surrounded by an enemy that would not stop until every last drop of blood had been spilled. He looked down at Pyrrhus, whose eyes flickered open. Brother, did we win? Acastus hesitated. The truth was crueler than any orc blade. We still hold, he said quietly. Pyrrhus's lips twitched a shadow of a smile, or maybe a grimace. Then we've already won enough. His breath stilled a moment later. For a heartbeat, Acastus allowed himself to feel it, the exhaustion, the ache of loss, the faint ember of grief. But only for a heartbeat. The Emperor did not grant his angels the luxury of mourning. He rose slowly, towering despite the weight of his wounds. Murin, he called out, the line falls here. We hold until the last. Murin looked up, eyes hollow yet burning with faith. Then let them come. I will not shame our chapter. The distant roar began again, the orcs regrouping. Acastus could see their silhouettes through the smoke, thousands of them, laughing, shouting, revving their crude engines. Among them, a giant form loomed, an orc warboss, taller than a dreadnought, its skin a deep emerald scarred by decades of slaughter. It carried a jagged cleaver the size of a man, stained with marine blood. Waaagh, the monster bellowed, its voice shaking the ruins. The horde screamed in unison and surged forward again. Acastus activated his power sword, the blade crackling to life with a hum that cut through the chaos. For the Emperor, he whispered once more, though this time it wasn't prayer. It was defiance. They hit like a storm. Bolter shells exploded through the front ranks, shredding orcs into pulp. But the horde didn't stop. It never did. Murin roared as he swung his chain sword, cutting down three before a fourth tore his arm clean off. Still, he fought. Still, he screamed the Emperor's name as he fell beneath a tide of green fists. Acastus fought alone now. Every strike was fueled by rage, every motion a denial of death itself. He was a whirlwind of blood and fire, his sword flashing through armor and flesh alike. The orcs surrounded him, hacking, biting, clawing, but he refused to yield. Each kill was agony and triumph at once. Then the warboss came. It moved with terrifying speed for its size, smashing through its own kind to reach him. Acastus turned, meeting its charge head-on. The impact shook the ground. His sword met the cleaver in a burst of sparks, the sound like thunder cracking open the sky. The orc laughed, its voice booming. "You's a tough one. This'll be fun." Acastus didn't answer. Words were meaningless now. He struck, parried, dodged, but the creature was monstrously strong. Each swing of its blade sent tremors up his arm, cracking his armor further. The orc's cleaver finally connected, tearing through his pauldron and biting deep into his chest. Pain flared like lightning. He fell to one knee, breath ragged, blood flooding his lungs. The war boss loomed above him, raising the cleaver for the killing blow. And then with the last of his strength Acastus drove his power sword upward. The blade pierced the creature's gut, tearing through flesh and bone until it burst from its back in a shower of green gore. The orc froze, disbelief in its yellow eyes, before collapsing backward, shaking the earth as it fell. Acastus slumped beside it, his armor hissing and bleeding oil. He tried to rise but couldn't. The battle around him faded into noise, distant, hollow. He could hear the orcs retreating, or perhaps celebrating. It didn't matter anymore. He looked up at the burning sky, a fractured canvas of smoke and light. He could barely see the stars, but he imagined they were still there, cold and eternal, far beyond the reach of this carnage. "For the Emperor," he whispered, one last time. And the world went silent. He didn't fight for victory anymore. He fought for meaning. For defiance. For the idea that somewhere, somehow, the Emperor still watched. In a moment of brief clarity amid the slaughter, Acastus caught a glimpse of Corvin, his brother, standing firm atop a mound of corpses, still firing, his armor cracked and burning. Then, a massive orc slug ripped through Corvin's chest, throwing him backward. Acastus felt the impact as though it struck him. He shouted, a wordless roar that shook the air. He tore through 3 orcs with his bare hands before reaching Corvin's body. The light in the marine's eyes was already gone. Acastus placed a bloodied hand over his brother's chest plate. "You held," he whispered. "You held till the end." The tide didn't stop. It couldn't be stopped. The sky itself had turned green, lit by the fires of orc munitions and the screams of dying men. The world was ending, and the angels of death were falling one by one. Still, Acastus fought. Because that was all there was left to do. And as the night bled into dawn, if dawn could still exist on a world this cursed, his voice could still be heard through the static of the broken vox, repeating the only words that still mattered. For the Emperor, what remains of a warrior when the battle is over, and there's no one left to hear his victory? In Warhammer's grim darkness, even triumph tastes like ash, because for a space marine, survival is not peace, it's punishment. The world lay quiet again. The screaming had stopped. The thunder of guns was gone. Only the slow crackle of fire and the whisper of wind moving through ruin remained. It was as if the planet itself was exhaling, tired, broken, finished. Brother Sergeant Acastus lay among the dead. His armor, once unyielding, was now a shattered shell, half buried beneath the corpses of orcs and his fallen brothers. The power cells hissed softly, leaking faint trails of smoke. The glow in his chest plate flickered, weak and dying just like him. He didn't know how long he had lain there. Minutes, hours, maybe a day. Time had no meaning now. Pain was his only anchor, sharp, constant, familiar. Every breath was a struggle. Every blink felt like a decision. Yet he clung to life. Because even in death, a space marine does not surrender. He could smell the battlefield, the iron tang of blood, the rot of orc flesh, the lingering ozone from energy weapons. The scent of war. The scent of everything he'd ever known. He turned his head slowly. Brother Marin lay a few meters away, eyes open, staring blankly into the void. His armor was split in two, his chest torn apart. Even in death, his hands were still wrapped around the hilt of his chain sword. Pyrrhus was gone, crushed beneath a collapsed wall. There would be no burial rites. No hymns. No chapter banners raised in their honor. Acastus tried to move, but his legs refused him. His body had become a prison of pain and metal. He knew the wounds were mortal. His primary heart had stopped beating, and the secondary one was slowing. The Laraman cells in his blood were failing to clot the flow. Even his gene-forged resilience had reached its limit. He laughed, quietly at first, then bitterly. It sounded like rust grinding on stone. "So this is it," he murmured. "The Emperor's finest, dying in the dirt like everything else." For the first time in centuries, he allowed himself to think of who he had been before the armor, before the oaths, a child from a forgotten hive city, taken by the chapter, forged into something more than human, and stripped of everything human in the process. He had believed it was glory. But now, lying among corpses and ruin, he wondered if it was just another form of slavery. The sky above him shimmered faintly, the green fire fading, replaced by the faint glimmer of stars. He could barely make them out through the haze. Somewhere up there, orbiting ships still drifted, silent and blind. Perhaps they had forgotten him. Perhaps they had never known he was here. His vision blurred. The world dimmed at the edges. But as the darkness crept closer, something stirred, a light, faint at first, like the glow of a distant dawn. A voice came with it, calm and vast, echoing not through his ears but through his soul. "You have done your duty, my son." The voice was familiar, or maybe his mind wanted it to be. The Emperor, perhaps. Or the memory of a chaplain long dead. It didn't matter. It was enough. "You held when others fell. You stood when the world broke. You are the shield that does not yield." Acastus tried to speak, but no sound came. His lips moved, forming one final, silent prayer. "I am the Emperor's wrath, and his mercy." The light grew warmer, brighter, not blinding, but peaceful. The battlefield around him faded, replaced by something else. He saw a hall of golden light, endless and silent, filled with the echoes of warriors long gone. His brothers stood there, Atreus, Pyrrhus, Murren, waiting, whole again, their armor gleaming as it once had. He reached for them, his gauntlet trembling. And then, silence. The light flickered out. The battlefield returned. The fire still burned. The flies still swarmed. But Brother Sergeant Acastus moved no more. His final breath was lost to the wind, carried over the ruins and ash. There was no witness to his passing, no banner raised, no honor roll carved in marble. Only the cracked Vox unit on his chest, still transmitting a faint, broken signal into the void. For the Emperor. And somewhere, in the cold emptiness of space, that signal drifted, a ghost's whisper lost among the stars. What becomes of a hero when the galaxy forgets his name? In the grim darkness of the far future, remembrance is a luxury, and even the greatest warriors fade into the silence of dust and decay. The battlefield that had once roared with fury now lay motionless beneath a bruised and colorless sky. The fires had burned out, leaving only smoke and the faint shimmer of heat rising from molten metal. The bodies of orcs sprawled across the broken landscape, green flesh bloated, weapons rusting where they fell. Among them, unmoving and eternal in death, lay the armor-clad corpse of Brother Sergeant Acastus. Days passed. Then weeks. The wind buried the dead beneath layers of ash. Storms swept across the valley, washing away blood, scattering bones. The once great fortress was reduced to fragments, swallowed by the earth it had once defended. No banners marked the spot. No pilgrims came to pray. And yet in the heart of that desolation, something lingered. The faint, dying Vox beacon still pulsed once every few minutes, sending out a whisper into the void. It was a broken signal, barely a flicker in the endless noise of space. But somehow, it endured. For the Emperor. That was all it said, again and again, carried across the stars like the heartbeat of a ghost. On the 47th day, a strike cruiser of the Adeptus Astartes entered orbit. It had come not in answer to the distress call. That signal was too weak to be heard, but as part of another campaign, another endless war. The tech marines detected the faint vox pulse purely by chance, a meaningless anomaly on a dying world. A squad was dispatched to investigate. They found the ruins of the fortress, the sea of dead orcs, and at the center of it all the body of Acastus, still seated against a wall of stone, his armor blackened, his sword buried in the earth beside him. The marines said nothing as they approached. There were no words to offer the dead. Only silence, and the weight of understanding that this was what all of them were destined for. They retrieved his body and placed it aboard the ship, treating it with reverence. His armor would be reforged. His gene seed reclaimed. His name recorded in the chapter archives, not for glory, but for record. Another line in an endless list of martyrs who had given everything and gained nothing. The world he died defending was declared lost. Exterminatus would soon cleanse it entirely. No trace of Acastus's battle would remain. Not the blood. Not the ruins. Not the sacrifice. Only his story, sealed within the chapter's vaults, never told, never sung, but remembered in silence by those who knew what it meant to die without recognition. In the cold halls of the strike cruiser, his armor rested upon a plinth, repaired but empty. A purity seal fluttered gently in the recycled air, its faded parchment still bearing his final vow: steel endures. Faith burns. Duty never falters. Outside, the stars drifted by vast, eternal, uncaring. The galaxy moved on, swallowing yet another war, another victory, another loss. And somewhere, deep within that infinite void, the faintest echo still whispered through the static the last words of a dying warrior on a forgotten world. Have you ever wondered what happens after the war, when the heroes are gone, and the ashes of battle are scattered across dead worlds? Who remembers the fallen when the Imperium moves on to its next endless fight? Centuries passed. The name Acastus became nothing more than a data entry in the archives of the chapter fortress monastery. Even his armor, once shining with purity seals and carved honors, had been reforged and worn by another brother, then another, each carving their own oaths over the fading marks of those who came before. In this way, Acastus lived on, not in memory, but in the silent continuity of duty. But there are those in the galaxy who remember what the Imperium forgets. Far beyond the reach of Terra, a small Mechanicu's outpost orbiting a dead moon picked up something strange, a signal, ancient and corrupted, still pulsing weakly from a long-forgotten world. The tech priests almost dismissed it, but its encryption matched an extinct chapter frequency, thousands of years old. Curious, one Muggos ordered an analysis. The message was fragmented, but a single phrase could still be decoded for the Emperor. The data reverberated through the Mechanicu's network, spreading like a ghost story. Even among the cold, logical priests of Mars, whispers began of a space marine who never fell, whose spirit still called out across time. The rumor reached inquisitorial ears, then the scholars of the ecclesiarchy, and finally the ranks of the Imperial Guard. Soon, stories began to spread among the front lines of a nameless space marine who appeared in the darkest hours of battle, when all hope was lost. They said he fought with the fury of a dying star, his armor scarred, his voice echoing through the smoke: "Hold the line." For the Emperor. No proof ever surfaced. No auspex, no picked feed, no surviving witness. Yet across countless worlds, men and women swore they had seen him standing atop burning trenches, cutting through orcs, tyranids, and heretics alike, vanishing into the fog when victory was won. Was it merely faith, born from desperation? Or something more? The Inquisition launched quiet investigations, tracing the old signal, chasing the ghost through sectors long abandoned. Some reports claimed the beacon still pulsed on the same desolate world where Acastus fell, the signal somehow growing stronger over time. Others said the planet no longer existed, wiped from the charts by exterminatus. The truth was irrelevant. In the Imperium of man, belief itself is power. The story of the nameless Marine became a whisper of strength passed from soldier to soldier, a myth that reminded them that sacrifice never truly dies. And somewhere in the silence between the stars, that faint signal still burns. Not loud. Not proud. But eternal. It's said that if you stand in the ruins of a battlefield and listen closely beyond the static, beyond the screams, you can hear a voice, distorted by time and distance, repeating the words that outlived its speaker. Steel endures. Faith burns. Duty never falters. Because in the Warhammer 40K universe, death is not the end. It's just another form of service. What if war itself could remember? What if the echoes of blood and sacrifice didn't fade but lingered, shaping reality, twisting it, feeding the endless hunger of the galaxy itself? Millennia after Acastus's death, the world he fought on was gone from every imperial record. No cartograph, no star chart, no coordinates. But in the immaterium, the swirling, nightmarish sea of souls that men call the warp, the memory of that battle remained. Every scream, every prayer, every oath whispered in the shadow of death had left an imprint on the fabric of that realm. In the warp, time has no meaning. The battle still rages there, forever repeating, endlessly mirrored in the chaos of psychic energy. The Orks still charge, roaring their war cries. The Marines still stand, defiant and doomed. And Acastus, his form now only half remembered by the material universe, fights on. But he is no longer mortal. His body was lost, but his will, his sheer, unbreakable faith had carved itself into the warp like a burning scar. He does not feel pain, nor exhaustion. He fights without end, against enemies that never truly die. His soul has become part of that eternal war, a fragment of the Emperor's wrath echoing through the immaterial plane. Some say the Emperor himself allowed it. Others whisper that Acastus became something else, a phantom of pure purpose, unbound by death or decay. In the darkest corners of the galaxy, when Imperial ships cross the warp, astropaths sometimes speak of visions, a warrior of light standing alone against a tide of green-skinned monsters, his blade blazing like a fragment of the sun. Most dismiss these tales as psychic illusions, remnants of trauma and fear. But among those who've seen the warp with their own eyes, there are those who swear they heard a voice amidst the howling madness. The duty is not done. And in those moments, even the most hardened navigators shudder. Because they know the truth that in the warp, belief shapes reality. If enough souls believe that a hero still fights, then perhaps, he truly does. Meanwhile, in the material world, the Imperium continues its endless wars. Whole planets burn, sectors fall, and new heroes rise only to vanish into history. But when an Ork Waaagh grows too great, when even seasoned commanders feel despair claw at their hearts, a strange phenomenon is sometimes reported. Vox channels crackle with interference, sensors detect impossible energy readings, and amidst the chaos, a lone figure appears, armored, silent, relentless. He never speaks. He never stays. But wherever he stands, the tide turns. Is it Acastus reborn? A psychic echo made flesh? Or simply the Emperor's will, taking form to remind mankind that their faith still has power? No one can say. But those who survive such battles all agree on one thing: the enemy fears him. Even the Orks, creatures born of war itself, fall silent for a moment before charging once more into his wrath. And so, the war continues both in reality and in the warp. The line between life and death long since erased. The Imperium marches on, built on the bones of men like Acastus, heroes who became myths, myths that became belief, and belief that became eternal. Because in Warhammer 40K, there are no endings. Only battles without number, fought by souls who refuse to stop fighting. What if a single act of faith could ripple across eternity? What if one Marine's final vow became more than memory became will made manifest? Somewhere, deep within the Golden Throne on Terra, the Emperor's mind drifts through eternity bound, broken, yet omniscient. His awareness stretches across the warp like golden fire, flickering through the nightmares of humanity, guiding ships, inspiring saints, silencing demons. Yet even he, the undying God of mankind, feels the whispers of the countless who've died in his name. Among those voices, one stands apart, unwavering, sharp, familiar. Astartes. He does not pray for salvation. He does not beg for rest. His words are not those of a supplicant, but of a soldier. A report. A promise. The line held, my lord. The foe broke. Duty fulfilled. It is not much, in a universe built upon despair, and yet, the Emperor hears. For a flicker of an instant, his vast consciousness focuses upon the echo of that voice. 1,000 psychic storms part before the weight of that thought. Across the void, a light flares in the warp, golden, defiant, like the spark of a dying sun refusing to fade. In that moment, something changes. A ship lost in the warp suddenly regains its course. A guardsman on the brink of surrender feels his heart ignite with resolve. A dying sister of battle finds the strength to rise one last time, shouting the Emperor's name. They do not know why. But their faith burns brighter than before. And somewhere, in the infinite war between light and darkness, Astartes fights on, unseen, unnamed, eternal. The mechanic use priests who continue to trace the ancient signal report strange readings now. The message that once said for the Emperor has changed, subtly, almost imperceptibly. It now carries new words, flickering through static and interference, as if something in the machine itself has awakened. The Emperor remembers. No one believes it at first. The Inquisition suppresses the data, claiming it's an error, a corruption. But among the lower ranks, among the scribes, the acolytes, the soldiers who fight and die every day, the rumor spreads like wildfire. They begin to wear Astartes' name as a prayer mark. Some inscribe his vow, steel endures. Faith burns. Duty never falters. Onto their armor, their rifles, their hearts. It becomes a litany, repeated in the darkest hours of battle. And somehow, in some impossible way, it works. Orc warlords begin to whisper of a ghost knight who walks the battlefields of man, a figure of fire and silence, striking down their champions with impossible speed. Chaos cults speak of their rituals failing, of visions shattering when the golden flame appears. Even the daemons take notice. For the first time in centuries, they sense a flicker of divine interference that is not merely the Emperor's distant light but something personal. Something forged in blood, faith, and endless duty. A single soul that refuses to die. And in the warp, where nightmares are real and faith is a weapon, that is enough to shift the balance, even if only for a moment. Because that is the true horror and beauty of Warhammer 40K. In a universe without hope, faith still fights back. Astartes' war never ended. And maybe it never will. Because as long as humanity believes, as long as one soldier still whispers for the Emperor in the face of oblivion, the light will never truly go out. What if immortality isn't a gift, but a burden of duty? What if being remembered means never finding peace? Eons have passed. Empires have risen and burned, crusades have come and gone, and even the stars themselves have shifted in the void. Yet still, in the most distant corners of the galaxy, whispers endure of a lone warrior in tattered ceramite armor, standing defiant against the green tide. To the Orks, he's a legend, a ghost Bucha, the one who never dies. Whole Waaaghs have turned back at the mention of him. To the Imperium, he's become something more sacred, the eternal brother, the one who answers no chapter, yet bears the mark of all. To the servants of chaos, he's an abomination, a being that refuses to break, even in the face of eternity. And to the warp itself, he's a wound. Each time the warp surges, each time demons rise from the screams of dying men, the golden figure returns. He does not age. He does not sleep. He does not speak. His blade burns with the light of faith so pure that even the fabric of unreality bends around it. In every age of darkness, he appears. Not as a savior, but as a reminder that humanity endures not because it is strong, but because it refuses to surrender. Entire worlds have claimed to be blessed by his presence. On one death world, Imperial Guard survivors told of a figure who fought beside them in the night alone, relentless, holding off an orc horde until dawn broke. When the smoke cleared, there was no trace of him. Only a single purity seal nailed to a broken wall, bearing the words, "Faith burns." The ecclesiarchy, ever hungry for symbols of devotion, began to weave his name into sermons. They call him the Emperor's Shadow, the one who walks unseen beside mankind. Cathedrals are built in his memory, relics forged in his supposed image. Pilgrims travel light years to pray to a ghost, not realizing that their prayers are the very thing keeping him alive. Because belief in Warhammer 40K is not metaphor. It is creation. And so, Acastus or whatever remains of him fights on, drawn into existence by the faith of billions. His soul has become the vessel of the Imperium's collective will to survive. He is not free. He cannot rest. His war is eternal, and his purpose unending. Sometimes, when the warp storms grow quiet and the stars align just so, astropaths report seeing a vision of him standing before a blinding golden light. A voice speaks from that light, vast, ancient, compassionate yet terrible. "You have done well, my son. But there is still work to do." And the warrior bows his head and answers, as he did on the day he first donned his armor. "Then I shall fight, until all is silent." No one knows if it is truly the Emperor who speaks. Maybe it's only the echo of humanity's faith. Maybe Acastus became something beyond understanding, an avatar of the Emperor's endless war, born from both flesh and memory. But it doesn't matter. Because every time mankind teeters on the brink of extinction, he returns. You can hear it sometimes, they say, across Vox channels before a hopeless battle, a faint, static-laced whisper breaking through the noise. Hold the line. For the Emperor. And then the world burns with courage once more. Because in this universe of endless darkness, where hope is a heresy and peace a forgotten dream, one truth endures, that faith, once born in fire, can never die. And somewhere out there, across the stars, the eternal brother still fights, not for victory, not for glory, but simply because duty demands it. And that is what it means to be a space marine. What if the greatest battle isn't fought with weapons, but with the soul? What if the truest victory isn't survival, but endurance? The galaxy turns, and the Imperium continues its slow, grinding march through time. The endless war against Xenos, heretics, and daemons rages on, a cycle so vast and cruel that even eternity begins to blur. But through it all, through the endless slaughter and ruin, the echo of a single marine still resounds across the stars. Brother Sergeant Acastus. His name, once a whisper, is now legend. Chaplains recite his words before every crusade. Children in hive cities carve his sigil into their armor plates and pray for courage. Even the Inquisition, once skeptical, now silent, has added his name to the rolls of the sanctified unknowns, warriors whose deeds transcend identity and become faith itself. And yet, Acastus himself, or whatever remains of him, knows none of this. In the depths of the warp, he walks across battlefields of shifting reality, surrounded by nightmares and light. He feels no pain, no exhaustion, no victory, only purpose. The warp shifts and screams, reshaping itself into familiar scenes: the fortress he defended, the orc warlords roar, the moment his brothers fell. Each memory is reborn, over and over, and each time he stands, alone, unyielding. This is his eternity. His duty. His punishment and his honor. Once, amid the storm, he halts. The warp grows still. Before him stands a figure of radiant gold, faceless yet infinite, the Emperor, or perhaps the shadow of him. The silence between them hums with power. "You have fought long, my son," the voice says, ancient and vast. Would you rest? For the first time in 10,000 years, Acastus hesitates. He remembers his brothers, their laughter before the drop, the roar of bolters, the smell of burning promethium. He remembers the faces of those he saved and the countless more he couldn't. And then, slowly, he shakes his head. Rest is for the fallen. I still stand. The light flickers not with sadness, but pride. Then stand, my son. And let your endurance be the weapon of man. The figure fades, and Acastus turns once more to face the endless tide of enemies. But this time, there is something new in his stance, not defiance, not rage, but peace. He understands now. His existence isn't a curse. It's the Emperor's will given form, the embodiment of duty that cannot die. As he charges into the storm once more, his blade cuts through shadows and monsters alike. His voice roars across the warp, echoing through 1,000 worlds. Steel endures. Faith burns. Duty never falters. Across the galaxy, mortals feel it. Commanders rally broken legions. Priests scream sermons with renewed fire. Even the dying whisper those words with their last breath, not in fear, but in unity. And so, even though Acastus will never see the worlds he defends, never hear the prayers he inspires, his war continues, an endless flame burning in the darkness of a dying universe. Because in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But in that war, there is also something greater, the unbreakable will of humanity, made flesh in one immortal soul. And that is the brutal reality of a Space Marine vs Orc battle, that even when the body falls, the faith fights on forever. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.